In this episode, we start with one of the most practical ideas in security operations, and that is learning how to notice what matters without getting buried by everything that does not. Brand new learners often imagine security monitoring as a wall of screens filled with dramatic alerts, but the real work is usually quieter and more disciplined than that. Most of the time, defenders are sorting through normal activity, small irregularities, and constant technical chatter to figure out whether any of it points to genuine risk. That is why understanding logs and security events matters so much. They are the record of what systems, users, and devices are doing over time, and they give defenders a way to see patterns that would otherwise stay hidden. The challenge is not just collecting information. The challenge is recognizing the important signals inside a sea of routine activity so that warning signs are noticed early enough to matter. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A log is simply a recorded entry about something that happened on a system, application, device, or service. It might capture a successful login, a failed login, a file being opened, a settings change, a connection request, or an account being created. A security event is not always the same thing as a log entry, because an event usually means activity that has some security relevance, whether that relevance is obvious right away or only becomes clear when combined with other details. One failed login by itself may be ordinary, but a pattern of many failed logins across several accounts could become important very quickly. That difference matters for beginners because not every recorded activity deserves the same attention. Monitoring is really the discipline of learning which recorded actions are merely happening, which ones deserve awareness, and which ones may signal misuse, attack, or a breakdown in control. When people miss important signals, it is often because they treat all data as equally urgent or ignore too much of it altogether. One reason security monitoring feels hard is that modern environments generate an enormous volume of information. Every employee login, cloud action, software update, network connection, email delivery, file access, and policy check can leave behind some sort of trace. When thousands or millions of these records appear every day, it becomes easy to assume that more data automatically means better security, but that is not true on its own. More data can also create confusion, false confidence, and exhaustion if no one has a clear idea of what deserves attention first. This is where beginners need to shift their thinking away from raw quantity and toward meaning. Good monitoring is not a contest to collect the most logs. Good monitoring is about creating visibility that helps people notice abnormal activity, understand possible impact, and respond with enough speed and accuracy to reduce harm. Without that mindset, teams often drown in noise while the most meaningful warning signs pass by almost unnoticed. An important signal is usually something that changes the story of what you think is happening in an environment. It may be a direct sign of malicious behavior, such as repeated attempts to access a restricted account, or it may be a clue that something is off, such as a service account suddenly being used at a strange hour from an unexpected location. The signal becomes important not only because it is unusual, but because it may connect to risk, privilege, access, data movement, or system integrity. Beginners sometimes assume that only dramatic behavior matters, like malware running or large amounts of data being stolen, but many serious incidents begin with much smaller signs. A password reset that was never expected, a disabled security control, or a new administrator account can all matter more than a flood of less meaningful warnings. The key lesson is that significance comes from context. Security monitoring works best when people ask not just what happened, but why this event matters in relation to the system, the user, the time, and the possible consequences. Context is what turns a stream of technical records into something humans can reason about. A login at 3 in the afternoon may be routine for one employee and highly suspicious for another if that person never works at that time or usually connects from a different place. A file download may be harmless for someone in a data-heavy role and concerning for an account that should rarely touch sensitive information. This is why defenders care about normal patterns, business roles, asset value, and known workflows. When you understand what ordinary behavior looks like, unusual behavior becomes easier to spot without reacting to every small deviation. That does not mean normal equals safe, because attackers often hide inside familiar processes. It means that monitoring is stronger when it is grounded in how the environment actually works rather than an abstract fear. Teams that ignore context often create alert fatigue, while teams that build context are better able to separate real risk from background activity and keep their attention available for the events that truly deserve investigation. Another beginner mistake is believing that every high-volume alert source must be watched with the same intensity. In reality, different log sources answer different kinds of questions, and their value depends on what you are trying to see. Identity records can reveal suspicious access, unusual password activity, or privilege changes. Endpoint records can show process execution, device behavior, or attempts to disable protections. Network records can help reveal unexpected communication patterns, scanning behavior, or movement between systems that do not usually talk to each other. Application records can show errors, abuse attempts, and sensitive transactions. Cloud records can reveal configuration changes, new resources, or access patterns that deserve review. The point is not to memorize categories for their own sake. The point is to understand that meaningful monitoring comes from combining visibility across multiple parts of the environment so that you can notice not just isolated actions, but relationships between actions. Once you understand the sources of information, the next skill is learning to distinguish noise from priority. Noise is not the same as useless data, because even low-value records may help support an investigation later. Noise becomes a problem when it demands immediate attention without offering much security value in return. A common example is a repetitive alert that fires for routine behavior every single day, eventually training people to dismiss it without thinking. That is dangerous because the human mind adapts quickly, and constant low-value interruption makes it easier to miss the alert that is actually different. Priority comes from asking practical questions. Does this event involve sensitive systems, important data, unusual access, repeated failure, known abuse patterns, or control changes that weaken protection? If the answer is yes, the signal rises in importance. Effective monitoring is therefore not just a technical exercise, but a judgment exercise, where the goal is to reduce pointless interruption while preserving attention for activity that could change the security posture of the organization. A useful way to think about monitoring is to imagine that each event is part of a sentence, and meaningful security insight comes from reading the whole paragraph rather than staring at a single word. One failed login may tell you very little, but a failed login followed by a successful login from the same source, followed by access to a sensitive application, followed by a settings change, tells a much more interesting story. This is why defenders care about sequence, timing, and connection between events. Important signals are often not loud when viewed in isolation. They become visible when separate records are brought together into a pattern that suggests intent, progression, or impact. Beginners do not need to think of this as magic or advanced mathematics. It is closer to disciplined pattern recognition. Monitoring improves when teams learn to connect identity activity, device behavior, network movement, and sensitive actions into a coherent narrative instead of reacting to each record as though it exists alone in the world. Another part of not missing important signals is understanding that attackers often try to look ordinary. They may use valid accounts, common tools, approved services, or business hours precisely because these choices reduce attention. That means defenders cannot rely only on obviously malicious behavior. They also need to watch for subtle misalignment between who is acting, what they are doing, and what would normally make sense. A normal tool used in an abnormal way can matter just as much as a clearly malicious program. A trusted account requesting access it rarely needs can matter just as much as a blocked intrusion attempt. This is one reason why monitoring is closely connected to identity, permissions, and role awareness. When you know what users, accounts, and systems should usually do, you are better prepared to notice when legitimate access starts being used for illegitimate purposes. Many important signals are missed not because no data exists, but because the activity looked familiar enough to slip past casual attention. Beginners also need to understand that missing important signals is often a human problem as much as a technical one. People get tired, overloaded, distracted, and pressured by time. If monitoring produces endless minor alerts, analysts can become numb to warning signs, especially when most investigations lead nowhere. This condition is often called alert fatigue, and it is dangerous because it reduces curiosity at exactly the moment curiosity is most needed. Strong monitoring practices try to protect human attention. They do that by improving signal quality, reducing repeated low-value interruptions, grouping related activity, and making it easier to understand why an alert was raised. The best outcome is not a dramatic increase in alert count. The best outcome is that the right events reach the right people with enough supporting context that they can make a sound decision quickly. When teams design monitoring with human limits in mind, they become better at seeing what matters before a minor issue grows into a full incident. A simple example can make this clearer. Imagine an employee account that fails to log in several times late at night, then succeeds, then accesses a payroll system it rarely uses, and shortly after that begins downloading records in unusually large numbers. None of those facts alone absolutely proves malicious intent, because people forget passwords, work unusual hours, and access unfamiliar systems for legitimate reasons. Yet when those events are viewed together, the pattern becomes far more concerning. The timing is unusual, the system is sensitive, and the volume of access suggests a departure from the account's normal behavior. This kind of pattern is exactly what defenders do not want to miss. It shows why good monitoring depends on more than a single alert condition. It depends on joining events, applying context, and recognizing when multiple moderate clues combine into one strong signal that deserves quick investigation. There is also a common misconception that perfect monitoring means catching every bad action the moment it happens. Realistically, no environment has perfect visibility, perfect data quality, or perfect human attention. Systems may be misconfigured, logs may be incomplete, and not every suspicious action will stand out clearly at first. The goal is therefore not perfection, but dependable coverage of meaningful activity, thoughtful prioritization, and steady improvement over time. Teams get better by reviewing missed events, learning which signals were most useful, and adjusting what they watch closely. They also improve by understanding business priorities, because not every system carries the same level of risk. Monitoring should reflect what would cause the most harm if misused, disrupted, or exposed. When beginners understand this, they stop treating security monitoring as an impossible promise and start seeing it as an evolving practice of attention, learning, and risk-based decision-making. It also helps to remember that monitoring is not separate from the rest of security. Logs and events become far more useful when they connect to asset importance, access rules, data sensitivity, change activity, and known threats. If a critical server changes configuration unexpectedly, that matters partly because the server is important. If a user account gains new privileges, that matters partly because privilege affects what harm that account could cause. If a system starts communicating in a new way after a software change, defenders need to know whether that communication matches an approved business need or whether it suggests something else. This is why security operations are strongest when monitoring is tied to broader understanding rather than treated like a standalone technical feed. The more clearly you understand what the organization values, how systems are supposed to behave, and where trust boundaries exist, the easier it becomes to recognize events that deserve fast, serious attention. Over time, mature monitoring becomes less about staring at endless streams of activity and more about building a reliable habit of asking smart questions. What changed? Who was involved? Where did it happen? When did it begin? And why does it matter in this environment are the kinds of questions that keep defenders grounded. Those questions help beginners avoid two bad extremes. One extreme is panic, where every unusual event feels like a major breach. The other extreme is complacency, where repeated routine activity trains people to assume nothing important is happening. Good monitoring lives between those extremes. It accepts that most activity is ordinary while remaining disciplined enough to spot the combinations of behavior that deserve action. That balanced mindset is what keeps teams from being fooled by volume, distracted by noise, or blind to the subtle signals that often appear before serious security events fully unfold. As we close, the main idea to carry forward is that logs and security events are only valuable when they help people notice risk in time to do something useful about it. The real skill is not just collecting records or reacting to alerts, but understanding how to separate background activity from meaningful change. Important signals usually emerge from context, sequence, and relationship, not from drama alone, which is why patient observation and careful prioritization matter so much. When beginners learn to view monitoring as a practice of focused attention rather than endless technical noise, the task becomes much more understandable. You begin to see that security operations are really about building enough visibility, discipline, and judgment to recognize suspicious patterns before they turn into larger problems. That way, even in a busy environment full of constant activity, the signals that matter most are far less likely to be missed.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.